I call the meeting to order. Let's get started. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We are pleased to meet you again this afternoon on the second day of our preparatory meetings towards CSP8. Before we start with the agenda for today, I would want to remind delegates of a few housekeeping rules which are very important for these meetings to go smoothly. As I indicated yesterday, we've got interpretation that is available to all delegates, and both for those who are in this room and those who are joining us remotely. So we have demonstrated yesterday how that is done. Those who are joining us remotely, they will find an interpretation button at the bottom of their screen, and they can choose their language. But those who are in the room, they can use the device in front of them. We don't have a speakers list for this meeting prepared in advance. However, when the time for discussions come, you will be required, therefore, if you want to take the floor, to raise your nameplate if you are in this room. But if you are joining us remotely, you can still request for the floor using the chat function. We request that delegates who will be reading long statements and interventions, if they can make copies of those statements available to the Secretariat so that they can be transmitted to the interpreters. And I think that would facilitate interpretation. Yesterday we had incidents where some technical statements were made, and the interpreters never had the benefit of the text to facilitate interpretation. So we request and we plead with delegates to make those statements available in advance of the delivery being made. And again, we plead with delegates that the chat function is used for purposes of requesting the floor, as well as that of general inquiries with the Secretariat. But we would ask delegates not to overstress the chat function so that we can be able to manage that. With that said, I would like then to proceed and hand over to the facilitator of the working group on Article 9, who had a first hour yesterday and will be having the second hour this afternoon to continue with his work. Without much ado, I hand over to the facilitator, Ms. Rob Wensley. Over to you.
Thank you, Dumisani, and good morning to all. Good afternoon. I seem to get my mornings and afternoons mixed up with these sessions. Good afternoon to everyone. We're going to deal with, according to our multi-year work plan, with the topic 6 today, namely the role of the private sector in the transit and transshipment of arms. And we are going to have a kick-off presentation, which are usually always very informative in our discussions, especially on this topic of the industry and manufacturers and the rest of the private sector. And we are going to be joined virtually by Mr. Richard Patterson, or Rick, who is the President and CEO of Liberty's Keystone, an international consulting group dedicated to excellence and efficiency throughout the firearms and ammunition supply chain. He has served as Executive Director of the Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute for 17 years, leading in the creation of safety and reliability standards for firearms, ammunition, components, with a particular focus on design, manufacture, transportation, and storage. So I'm sure that we will be able to benefit greatly from his presentation. Rick, if you're online, you may take the floor.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Facilitator, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. My name is Rick Patterson, and I'm representing the Fair Trade Group. FAIR is an association of importers and exporters of firearms and ammunition. We're very appreciative of the opportunity to make this presentation. We believe none of us is as smart as all of us, and all of us working, collaborating, sharing information will help us develop an ATT that is effective at its intended goal of preventing the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons. And at the same time, I'd like to add, we're pretty fond of the goal of not adversely affecting the legal trade as well, which, as current events have so tragically underscored, is essential to securing peace in the face of evil aggression. I have 15 minutes to make all of you experts in the import-export business. So fasten your seatbelts, raise your seat backs and tray tables to full upright and lock position, and we'll get started here. I'd like to address 3 topics. Number 1 is just kind of a general overview of the what's required in the import-export business. 2, addressing the shipment, transshipment issues that may have impact on the ATT and vice versa. And finally, recommended paths forward based on our experience. Putting together an arms deal is really fraught with challenges and risks. Like every business, you have to cover the basics of staffing, scheduling, accounting, cash flow, profitability, and the hundreds of day-to-day issues and decisions that need to be made to keep the doors open and be able to provide employees with a living wage. On top of that, let's face it, we're not talking about toaster ovens here. We're talking about tools that in the right hands, like any tool, can do great things, and in the wrong hands can cause great harm. And there's a tremendous amount of paperwork, due diligence, and work that needs to go into making sure firearms and ammunition stay in the right hands and end up where they're intended to go. On top of that, you've also got a trade that is relatively small, very competitive, and pretty thin margins. So any errors, any time delays, and worse, confiscated products are extremely costly and can jeopardize the business. In addition, because of the nature of the products, you're looking not just at fines for violations of regulations, but loss of license, loss of the business, and even prison time. And too often, some of those challenges and some of those errors are really through no fault of the importer exporter, but that all goes as part of the business. The basic structure of a transaction is when an importer exporter learns that someone has firearms, ammunition, components for sale, and at the same time either knows of or finds a buyer who would like to purchase those products. You negotiate purchase agreements and sales agreements, very detailed, exactly what's being sold, what are the financial terms, and very frequently a buyer will require delivery deadlines with penalties to the importer exporter if the delivery is delayed beyond that. Once those contracts are in place, then you need to obtain all of the import-export licenses. That amounts to an incredible amount of detailed paperwork, a lot of due diligence, making sure that everybody in the supply chain, everybody in the governments involved are aware of what's happening, what's the details of that transfer. At the same time, the importer-exporter also has to arrange the shipping. So there's negotiations with the carriers, making sure that you can physically move the products from point A to point B as approved by the permits, and very often an importer or exporter will hire a freight forwarder to work on their behalf to take care of this extensive paperwork and shipping coordination. Because of the detailed and extensive nature of the government applications, this can lead to sometimes confusing and even contradictory information and differences between countries. For example, one country may require marking of multiple parts, while another country only looks at the single part, the frame or receiver. Many transfers involve used firearms, and serial numbers of different parts on any one particular firearm don't necessarily match. So you've got a government inspector who's trying to figure out, does this all match up? And they may not be familiar with firearms. You know, they're looking at a particular firearm and says, okay, this piece of paper says it should be serial number XYZ, but I'm seeing serial number 123 here. I'm seeing serial number ABC here. And all of that time delay while an inspector sorts out, you know, to make sure that everything is on the up and up, can create confusion and delays in the transfer. Delays in any sort of transfer, any sort of deal is a double whammy to the import-export community, because not only are you facing the possibility of penalties under contract with the buyer, but you're also paying very, very high storage fees at the port while the government inspectors are sorting out the shipment to make sure everything is matches the paperwork and is totally lawful. Another aspect that is important to the movement of firearms and ammunition, and particularly ammunition, is the proper and legal packaging and labeling of that material. Ammunition qualifies as a hazardous material, and the UN has created detailed and extensive model regulations to categorize the products being shipped and how they should be shipped to ensure safety. These model regulations are established by consensus and cooperation between UN member states, and that cooperation is frankly excellent as a result. The first step is to categorize what that material is as far as its hazards and the risk category of the product. That's a combination of both the inherent properties of the product itself as well as mitigating factors of the packaging surrounding that product. These testing requirements are very detailed, very specific, and once categorized, dictate how the package has to be labeled and various other shipping requirements for products that fit in that hazard class. All of this is contained in the hundreds of pages of the book UN Recommendations on the Transport of Dangerous Goods Model Regulations, commonly called the Orange Book. Further, there's thousands of pages in the Global Harmonization System Purple Book, which describes physical health and environmental hazards of chemicals, with the goal of harmonizing hazard communication in the labeling and the safety data sheets, which tells an emergency responder how to best handle that material in the event of different accidents. You may all notice driving down the road, you may see a truck and there's a diamond with a pictogram, maybe a number inside. That's a hazardous material, and that clearly communicates to an emergency responder what they're dealing with, and that tells them how they need to best handle that to minimize harm. Within the categorization, there's 9 different categories of hazardous materials. Ammunition falls under category 1, which is explosives. Those are further broken down in subsections. 1.1 would typically be, for example, blasting caps, depending on their packaging, but certainly medium and large caliber military weapons with energetic projectiles. 1.1 is something that, yeah, it's very likely to potentially go boom, and it's going to go boom very, very loud. Small arms ammunition with inert projectiles is generally 1.4, which is a minor hazard, and it's further subset of 1.4S. So there's very little risk, but it is still potentially an issue. When I was with Sammy, I put together a video, which is still available on YouTube, Sporting Ammunition in the Firefighter, which shows we used 500,000 rounds of ammunition. We burned it, we dropped it, we shot it, we crushed it under the treads of bulldozers, to show what happens. And it's relatively safe to handle. And as I mentioned before, the model shipping regulations also dictate, all the other hazmat classes and how the shipping needs to be handled among those different classes. Among that is the requirement that certain classes can't be shipped near each other. You don't want flammables near an explosive, for example. You don't want a corrosive near an oxidizer. You don't want an oxidizer near a flammable. And all of this creates a serious logistics issue for someone loading a ship, for the carrier, because not only do they have to address all of the issues, weight distribution, et cetera, which Dr. Honig pointed out yesterday, but you also have to keep your different hazmat categories segregated. And they also want to make sure that everything is set up for the most efficient loading and unloading of products as they visit ports. In the last meeting of the ATT sub-working group on transportation, we pointed out that shipments are frequently diverted to a port or airport that may not be part of the original plan. And again, as Dr. Honig pointed out yesterday, that can be for a whole number of reasons, emergencies, weather, but also more typically in seagoing transportation, you have a ship en route from point A to point B, and a customer calls from port C and says, hey, we've got a big package a big shipment to pick up. So they will pull into port C to make that, pick up that additional cargo. Technically under the ATT, this is a violation. This is a diversion. You need to get all of the permits, if there's time to even get the permits, because it can all happen fairly quickly, and obtaining permits and approvals of all of the parties involved, including export and import countries, can be very time consuming. As a more practical matter, assuming you can get the permits in time, there's the question of what does that mean to the country in Port C, because they've now issued a permit, but to actually inspect and verify that everything's in accordance with all of the paperwork, you may have to offload a significant portion of the ship to get to that container buried in the middle of the all of the other containers in order to get access to verify. Under strict interpretations of the ATT, this is all potentially unlawful diversions. And this is not a hypothetical. This has actually happened. Cargoes have been confiscated, which is financially devastating for the importer-exporter. And probably worse is we've actually seen carriers make decision to stop accepting those shipments. United and Lufthansa, for example. This reduces the options available for the lawful trade of small arms and light weapons, and reduces the efficiency of the shipment, and moves those shipments outside of the mainstream, which can ultimately reduce the transparency and visibility of the process. Paradoxically, the inefficient shipment system increases the exposure pathways for theft and unlawful diversion. Now I'd like to talk about the third topic, and that's our experience and what our experience has shown to be very effective programming and policies. And it comes down to cooperation between regulators and the regulated community. Every year, the Fair Trade Group hosts a 3-day workshop on regulatory compliance. The majority of speakers are high-ranking leaders of the relevant government regulatory agencies. Also speakers from the legal community that specialize in import-export law and compliance. And the outcomes from those are significant in several ways. First, it helps everyone get on the same page with a clear understanding of the appropriate implementation of the regulations. This is obviously important to the business and making sure that they get all of the paperwork right. But it's also important for the government as well. Large organizations, and governments included, it's very common for different regional offices, different ports, different border checkpoints to have different interpretations of the implementation of the regulations. And these differences create confusion that wastes time and resources to sort through. When the importer exporter has all the paperwork filled out the way they were instructed, but another region decides, yeah, that's not totally appropriate, and maybe there's more information, different information, then everyone, including the government regulators, spend time sorting out the issue. Obviously, that's a detriment to the industry, to the business, but it's also a detriment to the government official who now that time it could have been spent stopping and investigating the illicit trade. In the worst cases, of course, these different interpretations within a given country can result in confiscation of cargo or delays that extend beyond the delivery contract, resulting in those penalties. And both of those can keep the shipment from reaching the intended end user in the long run. The second benefit to a cooperative environment and the open communication is reduction in clerical errors. No one wants clerical errors. Correction takes time and resources by the company, fines levied against the company. Heck, you could even be looking at prison time because of the nature of the product. But this also hurts regulators and law enforcement by, again, taking time away from investigations into the illicit trade. Government workers all over the world are overworked, and to the extent we can minimize the time that they have to spend on a lawful transfer, so they can focus on questionable transfers. Everyone benefits from better education and clearer understanding of the detailed compliance with regulations. I will say this, while the members of the Fair Trade Group clearly understand our responsibility for regulatory compliance, we also believe regulators and law enforcement have a related responsibility to make the regulations as clear, simple, and easily understood as possible. And finally, a significant benefit of the open communications afforded by these conferences is personal contacts between people in the business and people in the regulatory field, regulatory and law enforcement fields. When you have that open and cooperative relationship, answering a question, solving a problem is a simple phone call. In the absence of that cooperative environment, companies will be suspicious of the consequences of raising a possible alarm for fear of being targeted by heavy-handed enforcement. So in conclusion, members of the import-export community are aware their business is extraordinarily complex, and we're not dealing with, again, toaster ovens. There are dozens of variables in every transaction and risks common to all business sectors, but Due to the nature of the products, there are countless minutiae of details that need to be addressed. And frankly, we're proud to get critical tools into the hands of those who stand in the way of and fight tyranny and evil aggression. Our goal is smooth, efficient, and error-free transactions to get that done. And our experience has shown that time and again, while a zero tolerance, prescriptive, and heavy-handed approach makes a great political soundbite, in reality, it's a cooperative relationship with regulators and law enforcement that's the best policy to fight crime and illicit diversion. We want to do the right thing, and we want to make sure our products reach the intended recipient. I'd like to thank you again for this opportunity to share our experience and perspectives as we all work together for a more peaceful world and successful arms trade treaty. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rick. I think the discussion would go beyond simply transit and transshipment to the wider impact of the role of industry, and it's always very good to interact with the private sector on this particular issue, because many of us in this particular conference room and those other government officials online work within their government regulatory systems. There's some issues that you raised that are very important about, amongst others, clerical errors or delays. I'm faced with that kind of thing in my job, where fingers are being pointed at me in certain delays, but our regulatory systems on the transfer of conventional arms is an interdepartmental governmental process that can take a very long time, and it's not as simple as it always sounds. That an application for in our case, a permit, which is widely known as a license, is delayed. The blame is being put on our door. I just also want to touch on one other aspect. You know, in Africa, from time to time, South African controlled items are discovered or found that have been diverted or left behind or whatever. Now, it's never the government's intention, any of our government's intention, to willfully breach international agreements to ensure the responsible trade of arms. And in fact, a country like mine, South Africa, which is a relatively small manufacturer of conventional arms, its interests, our interests, are to ensure that our industry is also protected, small as it might be. So in the bigger scheme of things, when you look at the arms trade treaty, we never approached the negotiations to that with the aim of restricting the legal arms trade. Not at all. It was to promote responsibility and set certain norms. That's what our aim was. You mentioned the issue of ships being diverted due to certain reasons, for certain reasons. I think the concept of reasonable sort of motivations behind that diversion is perfectly acceptable. It is not seen as a breach of the treaty. That is within reason. One can argue why that had to take place in a particular instance. If it becomes habitual, it becomes a problem. With those few remarks, thank you, Rick. I hope you can stay online. while we take any possible questions from delegates or interventions on this particular issue. Is there anyone who would like to request the floor at this stage? There is someone at the back there. Is that Cameroon?
Oui, c'est le Cameroun.
Yes, it's Cameroon. Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to thank Mr. Patterson for his presentation, which demonstrates very clearly that the private sector has a very important role to play in all of this as regards transit and transshipment. I would have one question. A little earlier during his presentation, he talked about cases of diversion that could be described as ordinary, that take place for meteorological reasons or reasons of emergency. In such cases, what measures can be taken as regards the private sector? What measures can be taken to ensure that a case of a diversion that might be described as ordinary does not become an illicit case of diversion, which would prevent cargoes that have been ordered actually reach their destination as they should, as indicated? Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the question from the distinguished delegate from Cameroon. As I understand, the question is, okay, this happens, and what's the solution? How do we address that? And I think that's why we're here today, because these are complex issues, and you know, the way the ATT is currently worded and interpreted by some countries, there is no such thing as an normal course of business diversion. Any diversion is a violation. That's why, you know, a particular country fined airlines that made a landing in their country that wasn't originally planned. And that's why, because of those fines, those carriers have decided to exit the legal marketplace. So, you know, it is certainly a challenge. And I think again, getting back to what we found to work is that cooperation and, you know, open relationship between the private sector and government, you know, understanding that, you know, we all have the same goal. And there, at the same time, we also know that there are individuals out there that are in the illicit trade, so that cooperation is I think the secret to coming up with the best solution, and that communication, which is what we're doing now. So I don't know that I have any specific, hey, if we did this wording or, you know, this solution. I think that's the purpose of this discussion. You know, from our perspective, this is what we're seeing as an unintended consequence. There are some, you know, negatives that are counterproductive to the goals of the ATT that may come out of that. So, you know, how can we work together to come up with a solution that addresses that problem, but also gives the countries, the member states, a comfort level that arms transfers are going from point A to point B as intended, and that the ultimate recipient of those products is the person who should be receiving them.
Thank you for that, Rick. Yes, I mean, in my portfolio, I also deal with a number of other conventions, and you use the term unintended consequences. In any negotiation that we enter into for a convention and the adoption of that convention, there are certain gaps. And in this convention, there are some ambiguities, and that's why we're actually in this meeting or this week's session on, for instance, clarifying what do we understand under the terms transit and transshipment. And it goes for those of us who deal with the anti-personnel mine ban treaty. You are entitled to retain a minimum number of anti-personnel mines if you're a state party for training and development purposes. Now, it's up in the air as to what the minimum number is or would be, and for how long. And there's certainly questions from year to year on certain states' parties, including my own, that don't actually use any mines in a given year for development and training purposes. So there are, as I said, in every convention there is an anomaly that we need to address. I want to thank you also, Rick, for mentioning about the interaction from private sector and government. Again, that is very important. Is there anyone else who would like to intervene on this particular issue? South Africa, you have the floor, sir.
Good afternoon. I must thank you, facilitator, and also thank everyone with the opportunity I have received. There are a number of things that I wish to raise, which perhaps will help. My hope being that they will not confuse the issue. I'm the head of Secretariat in South Africa and a lawyer by training. I will not sit here perhaps and say we have a perfect system in South Africa, but I'd like to perhaps frame it in the following way, and that is to say, the regulator, which is our office, exists to serve the industry. And because of that, we then act on the basis that international treaties and conventions, by virtue of ratification, therefore, we think international, but we act local, which therefore then says the industry is regulated, but not by accident. In other words, there is a framework in place wherein any entity that requires to partake in this industry would then be registered with the regulator. It is key that I emphasize that because it then separates the ordinary person from the person who intentionally says, this is essentially what I want to actually do. So I'm not saying the regulator is actually the center of the universe, but I'm saying there are systems in place that the regulator has and tools that then ensure that industry is one, well-versed with what is required, and two, also knows what to do in order not to be either falling foul of the regulations and other aspects that are prescribed. It's a very, I think, labor-intensive process, but it is an effective one that actually, if properly implemented, in part helps with managing some of the challenges that are here. For instance, in our case in South Africa, when you are actually authorized with a license to trade, you are essentially registered to be in a certain process or line of business. So it's not everything that is out there that you actually licensed to have. That prevents in part clerical errors, misstatements of products or identification thereof. But in the whole ecosystem, we have a process that actually says there's a stop and go, because each part of that is meant to ensure that every successive stage has been complied with in order to then remain compliant in terms of the law. So what I'm saying is it's important that industry accepts that there is a regulator, and the regulator also accepts that they exist in order to help and support industry to remain compliant, to ensure that products that are produced end up with those that are intended to actually be supplied or to be ultimate recipients. And it is correct that no country, at least ours included, actually wants to have its products actually identified elsewhere other than the intended destination or endpoint in terms of the authorization. I think I'll pause there.
Thank you, South Africa. Next, we have the Global Coalition for Limitation of Armaments. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. At the outset, we want to note that this is a joint intervention from the Global Coalition for Limitation of Armaments, which include the civil society organizations from Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and MAD for Peace Development and Human Rights Association. We thank you for the presentation you gave yesterday about transit and transshipment by sea. And we want to stress the importance of shedding light on the process of transferring weapons by sea, because the process of transferring weapons to conflict countries does not have any kind of controls or regulations. And we all know that the process of transferring weapons to conflict countries exacerbates conflicts, and humanity pays the price for it. The real problem is that there are efforts to establish global controls, but there is a gap in implementation. For example, there are illegal transfer of weapons by sea to Yemen without any monitoring and evaluation of those weapons. It should also be noted that the Iranian language was used on the explanatory labels affixed to the boxes of the weapons. The process of regulating these operations is complex, and during our participation in the informal consultation of the third session of the open-ended intergovernmental working groups on drafting the content of international regulatory framework, we refer to the various operations of the illegal transfer of arms control of the sea, across the sea, through private security companies, and demanded the need to engage the state parties to the Arms Trade Treaty in order to be able to define a clear operational regulatory framework and also to strengthen the international cooperation process. Mr. Moderator, we appreciate the efforts and proposals made by yesterday's side events on post-shipment controls organized by Germany, Canada, and Switzerland, in which they represented and presented practical technological efforts in the framework of the follow-up and evaluation, which can be an opportunity to exploit such points in the control and monitoring process in the operation of arms trade to countries affected by conflict. The second point that the Global Coalition wants to highlight is the lack of the private sector participation in the discussions and sessions that's set within the framework of implementing and activating the Arms Trade Treaty. Therefore, the Global Coalition takes advantage of the opportunity to coordinate an informal session to discuss the control and transfer of arms to countries affected by armed conflict, taking into consideration that the agenda of that session includes the risks and challenges, and that the subject of language and its impacts on illegal transfer across the sea. The Global Coalition for Limitation of Armaments across all affiliated organizations from Africa, Europe, Asia, and Latin America can organize sessions and informal discussion with private sector companies for discussion. And this is to promote the objectives of Arms Trade Treaty. And thank you, Mr. Moderator, for giving us the floor.
I thank the Global Coalition for Limitation of Armaments. The last point that you made about the interaction of from private sector, that's why our sessions are structured this way, is that it's not a purely state-driven process. It not by no means. And then as for the additional topic that you propose, if you look at the ATT website and the multi-year work plan on Article 9, the very first section under that work plan has questions on which topics have been omitted to your mind and which topics have not received sufficient attention. So by all means, send it to the Secretariat in writing, send your views to the Secretariat in writing, and we will see how we can accommodate that. That's you're welcome to do so. Do I see anyone else wishing to take the floor? That does not seem to be the case either virtually or in the room, which means you will have about a 10-minute coffee break before the next session. And with that, I will adjourn this session. Thank you very much for your participation, and also to Rick in the US. Rick, by the way, what time is it on your side?
It's 7:50 in the morning. Not too bad.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Fortunately, it wasn't a morning meeting in Geneva.
Thank you as well for joining us, Rick.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
This session is adjourned.
I call the meeting to order, please. If we can get started. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start with the second part of this session, dedicated to Article 11, which is diversion. This sub-working group on Article 11 on diversion is facilitated, or the facilitator of this sub-working group is Ms. Stella Petrovic from Serbia. She will be facilitating this session online via the Zoom platform. She couldn't be here, so she will be facilitating directly from Belgrade. And her agenda, as you might have seen, she will be looking at 3 topics, and she would deal with those immediately when I hand over to her. And I would like to test whether, Stella, are you online? Can you hear me?
Yes, I am.
All
Good
right.
afternoon, Dumisani. Good afternoon to all.
Thank you so much, Stella. I hand over to you then.
Thank you, Dumisani. As we are hearing well, I'm going to start to facilitate today's session on Article 11 diversion. At the very beginning, I would like to thank to all delegates who are participating in person. Unfortunately, this session, I was unable to facilitate this session in person, but I think that we wouldn't have any technical problems for this facilitation. Also, I would like to thank to all delegates and all other participants who are participating remotely. As the facilitator of the Vegeti sub-working group of Article 11 diversion, I'm going to present in short our plan of work for today's agenda. I think we have a very interesting agenda for today, and I hope it will be full of interventions from your side. As you know, our first preparatory meeting in February considered the role of transit and transshipment states in preventing of diversion. Today's session will, in accordance to multi-year working plan, will explore the last phase of transfer chain. It is the 3rd phase of transfer chain after delivery. In order to make conversation easier, today's session is divided into 3 topics. First topic is the role of importing states in preventing diversion. The second one is post-delivery cooperation. And the third one is the role of private sector and civil society in mitigating diversion risk after delivery. All these 3 topics are very important. And I think that synergy of all 3 will make complete diversion prevention after delivery. Now I will go into details regarding our three three sessions of today that we prepared for today. And the first one will be issuing delivery notification by importing state. And this is a very important moment where importing state and his different kind of authorities may deliver customs service importation delivery note, as well as delivery verification certificate. Here, it is very important to make difference between these two documents, especially that the first document of importing the goods signed by customs is not confirmation that the goods are delivered to the end user. The document named delivery verification certificate is issued by official authority, who is in this specific case end user, and it is pretty good guarantee that the goods are and well received by the end user. This moment is very important as from this point, named end user is responsible for the future of the goods. Also, having in mind this specific moment of the responsibility of this importing end user, maybe it should be considered gradual introduction of this document as one of the mandatory documents for every single import, for every single export or import in this case. Having in mind its form, which is very similar with end user certificate form according to the data included, and it is issued by the same authority which is already issued the EUC. This will make international export in this case much secure, and the responsibility will be easier to establish. Then regarding the first session, we have to mention that maintaining records and registering it for conventional arms entering into their national territory, as well as the secure transfer of these authorized end users are very important, but also sharing this information may be of the great importance for post-delivery verification. Also, ensuring stockpile management procedures are very important, especially including routine security inspections and audits of the conventional arms stockpiles of all end users. Here, we also have one question which is raised from this, which can be connected with post-delivery cooperation. And in this case, sometimes it can be possible that exporting state may ask for the management procedures and for the stockpiles of the goods which they already exported to the importing country. Also, it is very important to have effective legislation, as it is the first and last step in for investigating and punishing diversion. And it is very important to stress that if we are not investigating and if we are not punishing diversion related offenses, we are not in complete circle of prevention of diversion. Then second phase is post-delivery cooperation. we will explore the possibility of exporting states conducting post-delivery checks in cooperation with competent authorities of importing states to verify compliance with end-user conditions, such as condition that no re-export can take place without prior notification of the country of the origin. It would be interesting to hear how often do we receive from end user, how often we receive questions from the end user. Are the exporting state I'm sorry. Then we have big challenges regarding the post-delivery cooperation. At the first hand, it is the end user open for cooperation? And the second thing is that sometimes post-delivery inspections are very expensive, and not all the countries have a possibility to do the post-delivery cooperation inspection. As we already have, unfortunately, only few countries who are doing post-delivery inspection from time to time. It will be, I think, very interesting to hear their experience regarding their inspection and especially cooperation and openness of the importing country to cooperate with them. Also, we should see what are the options for strengthening this cooperation, and is there a more space for strengthening this cooperation between exporters and importers. Also, at the end, we are going to explore a third session. It is the role of private sector and civil society in mitigating diversion risk of post-delivery. This session and this role is very important, because only with the cooperation of official authorities, private sector, and civil society, we are able to mitigate diversion in a post-delivery phase fully. I hope that we are going to hear some very interesting intervention here from the civil society and the private sector, as this topic can be very interesting, and they are very involved in this part of transfer chain. Having in mind a limited time for discussion, I suggest that the delegates who wish to intervene may comment all three topics altogether, or only one or three, regardless the order of the topics that is already mentioned. I suggest to start with interventions. The floor is yours, and anybody would like to have intervention. I hope Dumisani will help me from the conference room, as I do not have possibility to see who would like to intervene in the conference room.
Thank you, Stella, for the introduction, and I I will help you with the request
Thank you.
for the floor. In the room at the present moment, I would recognize the following speakers or request for the floor. Switzerland will be followed by Ireland, and after Ireland, we'll have El Salvador.
El Salvador.
All right, Switzerland, please.
Thank you. Madam Facilitator, let me first express Switzerland's gratitude for your much like exporting states, importing states also play an important role in preventing diversion. Imports of arms should therefore also be assessed for possible diversion risk. Based on our experience, a licensing requirement for all types of arms imports appears to be an effective measure to mitigate diversion. Therefore, an import license is mandatory in Switzerland. Our country grants import of arms if it is not contrary to international law or national interests. In our opinion, another useful measure is the issuing of a delivery notification as mentioned in attachment 1 of your documents. With this notification, the final recipient certifies that he has received the arms. Switzerland also requests such a notification for certain exports. Regarding the second topic, Switzerland considers post-delivery cooperation or post-shipment verification, as we call it, an important measure to mitigate the risk of diversion. The decision by Switzerland to introduce and implement post-shipment verification was triggered by 3 cases of unauthorized re-exports in the past. Since 2012, Switzerland has carried out over 45 post-shipment verifications in 32 countries on 5 continents. Since its introduction almost 10 years ago, most carried out post-shipment verification have been successful. Good cooperation and communication between importing states and the Swiss authorities were crucial for this. Post-shipment verifications are announced by our local embassies via the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the competent ministry of the concerned end recipient. Together with the competent ministry of the importing state, the post-shipment verifications are being prepared and then carried out. This cooperation shows that post-shipment verification should be seen as a confidence-building measure between exporting and importing state. The impressions gained from post-shipment verification are also taken into account for further applications, but not only. As licensing officers, we must assess the diversion risk of arms exports based on information from agencies involved in the licensing process and public information. In general, this risk assessment can be a rather subjective view of the exporting state. In order to improve the reliability of this assessment, a post-shipment verification helps as it allows to gather impressions on site and to establish personal contact with the end recipient of the arms in the importing country. Establishing personal contact is, in our view, a very valuable gain for importing states as well as for exporting states because it creates better understanding and enhances mutual trust. In addition, the cooperation between importing and exporting state allows to further mitigate diversion risk. The ATT provides the perfect setting to discuss the post-shipment verification solution holistically with all stakeholders. In the end, having an instrument such as post-shipment verification would benefit all states as it serves as a cooperation and confidence-building measure, as well as a measure to mitigate the risk of diversion when assessing export requests in line with Articles 6 and 7 of the ATT. Lastly, for the third topic, we see that the private sector has especially an important role to play as it is the exporter of the arms. It is in the own interest of the private sector to ensure that its arms are not diverted to an undesirable end recipient. It can do this, for instance, by vetting its buyers, but also by reducing the risk of corruption amongst its personnel. In addition, the private sector should also ensure that it obtains correct and complete documents. In this way, the private sector also supports the licensing authority to mitigate diversion. To make the private actors aware of their important role in mitigating diversion, industry outreach should be a priority. Regarding the civil societies, open sources investigators such as Bellingcat or NGO reports could play a vital role in identifying and preventing diversions of arms. Thank you, Madam Facilitator, for giving us the floor.
Thank you, Switzerland, for your intervention and for your comments. It is very encouraging to hear that you had such a number of post-delivery inspections, and especially it is very encouraging to hear that you had such a good cooperation with importing states. And I think that example of Switzerland and its work in after delivery inspection is one that we should consider it as an excellent example, and it should be considered by all of delegates for sure. Thank you one more time. Now I'm giving the floor to Ireland.
Thank you for giving me the floor. First, allow me to thank you, Madam Chair, for your facilitation of this working group and for providing relevant discussion questions on the role of importing states in preventing diversion, post-delivery cooperation, and the role of the private sector and civil society. These sorts of in-depth discussions will help us identify methods and best practices for effectively addressing diversion under the ATT. As you suggest, my remarks will focus primarily on agenda items 2 and 3 on post-delivery cooperation and the role of the private sector and civil society. Yesterday's side event, thematic debate hosted by Germany, Canada, and Switzerland on post-shipment controls was a highly valuable and informative event that highlighted in concrete terms the benefits and challenges on the introduction and implementation of effective post-shipment controls. The perspectives from both government and industry were illuminating and helped provide context for our discussions here today, and we thank the panelists for their contributions. We hope that meetings like this one, like the event yesterday, which facilitate exchange of practical information, can continue beyond the Presidency's CSP8 theme on post-shipment controls. In our view, the potential benefits of adopting robust post-shipment controls far outweigh the costs, and exporting states should endeavor to introduce such systems to help mitigate the risk of diversion. While post-shipment controls are not explicitly mentioned in the ATT, they are fully in line with confidence-building measures and calls for cooperation towards implementation found throughout the treaty, notably in Articles 7, 11, and 14. As outlined in UNIDIR's presentation yesterday, some challenges and concerns include fears over state sovereignty and control, a culture of, quote, deliver and forget, and reluctance to share information on diversion incidents, something that hopefully the Diversion Information Exchange Forum can help address once operational. The practical presentations from Switzerland and Germany also highlighted just how much work goes into these measures, and we commend Switzerland's goal of 100% inspection. Despite some of these challenges, these measures go a long way in building the necessary confidence and channels of communication between importing and exporting states by helping importing states with record keeping and compliance with assurances, facilitating information sharing within the importing state, and ultimately promoting international assistance and cooperation to prevent diversion. Finally, Madam Chair, we agree that industry and civil society have distinct and valuable roles to play in mitigating the post-delivery diversion risk. Ireland fully supports their activities in supporting implementation and collating open source information to support monitoring bodies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for very, very detailed intervention. Now I'm going to give the floor to El Salvador. Please.
Buenas tardes. Agradezco a la señora facilitadora por brindarme
Thank you very much, Madam Facilitator, for giving the floor. Thank you to the. I also thank the Secretariat for letting us share our experiences on ATT. Our country is a net importer of weapons, and we have established our own process, even in that is included in the contract of weapons acquisition, both by the private industry and by the armed forces. As for the control measures, the our Ministry of Defense have their own warehouses where all weapons must be stockpiled, at least initially, when they enter the territory of El Salvador, before being delivered to the end user. This is a guarantee both for the exporting and the importing countries, and for all the private enterprises that have some role in the process. They can thus make sure that there is no diversion of weapons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, El Salvador, for your comments and for your intervention. Anyone else would like to have the floor?
Stella, if I can just read
Yes,
you
please.
the next three. I have Norway, Control Arms, Cameroon, and Mexico, in that order. Norway, Control Arms, Cameroon, Mexico. So we can start with Norway. Thank you.
Thank you, please.
My apologies. I think I did not. Yes, if you can introduce yourself, madam. I mistake.
Sorry, Romania.
Romania. Yes, we have the floor, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Facilitator, for giving me the floor. And thank you for your excellent work carried out so far on the implementation of Article 11 referring to diversion. Allow me to briefly share the Romanian export control regime on imports and the diversion mitigation measures applied by the Authority for Export Controls. Basically, our export controls regime provides symmetric control on exports and on imports of military goods. In this regard, every import of military items is licensed by the National Authority for Export Controls. An import license application has as support documentation a declaration of the end user and end use of goods signed by the end user. By exporter's request, the Romanian applicant must request the national authority to issue an international import certificate or to certify an equivalent document. The Romanian applicant must inform the national authority of the end-use and user assurances provided in advance to the exporter, and if the case, these documents must be presented in original copy. The import license applicant must notify the authority all persons which, to the best of its knowledge, are involved in the respective import. In the case of imports of military goods carried out through foreign partners registered in states which ensure the anonymity of shareholders, the import can be performed only if the foreign partner is represented in Romania by a person duly registered with the national authority. All imports are carried out only through designated customs offices set out in the licenses issued by the national authority. These customs offices are authorized by the National Customs Authority. After the import has been finalized, but no later than 2 months, the Romanian importer, further to the foreign partner's request, must ask the national authority to issue a delivery verification certificate or to certify an equivalent document. If the exporter or the foreign partner requests additional proof that the import has been completed, the National Customs Authority will issue such confirmation. An important aspect that I want to emphasize is that the transport of certain types of conventional arms on the territory of Romania, related to imports in this case, but related to all operations with military goods, are carried out under the Romanian Gendarmerie escort. If an importer wants to change the end user or the end use of the imported military goods, it is obliged by law to request the approval of national authority. By law, all permanent imports are subject to regular reports every 6 months to the authority on a dedicated template. Moreover, for the conventional arms subject to international tracing instruments, the importers must maintain relevant records, including the serial numbers and the country of origin of each product. This type of information is quarterly reported to the authority. Failure to comply with all these requests is subject to sanctions under the law. Thank you, Madam Facilitator.
Thank you, Romania, for your very detailed comments regarding your expertise. Now, I'm not sure, do we have Norway for intervention or not?
No, I've mistakenly called Romania Norway. My apologies. I think the next in line is Control Arms, followed by Cameroon.
Thank you. Please.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Facilitator. The following statement will address the issues outlined under Session 1 on the role of importing states in preventing diversion and Session 2 on post-delivery cooperation. Control Arms will make a second statement on the role of the private sector and civil society, and that will be delivered by a representative who's going to deliver that online. We entirely agree with you, Madam Facilitator, that it is indeed a very interesting agenda that you've put together for today. Control Arms welcomes that attention is being paid to the role of importing states in preventing the diversion of conventional weapons. While the focus is often and understandably on the role of exporting states and the requirement to assess diversion risks, there is much that can be done by importing states to prevent diversion. However, to be effective in preventing diversion, exporting, importing and transit states must work together to identify and mitigate diversion risks. On import documentation, delivery notifications from the importing state and delivery verification certificates are not merely an administrative exercise, but an essential part of the process of ensuring that weapons have reached their intended legitimate end user. Such documentation must be issued without delay upon importation of an arms shipment. In addition to registering and maintaining records of imported conventional weapons, Control Arms urges states to mark all weapons, and in particular small arms and light weapons, entering their territory. Together, these measures should assist the successful tracing of diverted weapons. Concerning stockpile management, prior to the acquisition of new supplies of weapons, importing states must objectively assess whether they have the resources, personnel and facilities to ensure that weapons are safely and securely stored. Control Arms also strongly supports new for old programs in which aged stockpiles of weapons are destroyed in parallel with the purchase of new weapons. Such programs can assist in preventing the undesirable re-export of old weapons. The current situation in Ukraine raises concerns in this regard, With large quantities of arms and ammunition being transferred into the conflict, states authorising these transfers should consider what will happen to these weapons when the conflict has abated. Experience from past conflicts highlights the serious risk of diversion of weapons into neighbouring states, fueling instability and crime. Control Arms welcomes the discussion on post-delivery cooperation. In this regard, post-delivery verification initiatives should be carried out with the full cooperation of the importing state and on the basis of a no re-export undertaking. The willingness of an importing state to cooperate on post-shipment verification should be established before an arms transfer is authorised. So thank you very much again, Madam Facilitator, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much for very valuable comments and your whole intervention. Now I'm giving the floor to delegation of Cameroon.
Merci de me passer la parole.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Madam Facilitator. Congratulations, Ms. Petrovic, for the coordination of the work of this subgroup, and thank you for giving me the floor to make a general comment on the themes that we're discussing today. As regards Article 11, specifically, I can tell you that my country, Cameroon, really is fighting the diversion of weapons as best it can. As essentially an importing country, the authorizations are delivered by the Presidency of the Republic regarding war equipment and by the Minister of Territorial Administration for so-called defense weaponry. The Presidency authorizes the Defense Ministry that is responsible for defense and security that are attached to the Presidency to deliver the final user certificate and the non-re-export certificate. As a confidence building measure in Cameroon, the transfer of weapons acquired by the army or by private security companies requires the written agreement, prior written agreement of the exporting country. This is something that appears very clearly in the laws of our country relating to weapons and ammunition. The various departments hold an up-to-date register of weapons and ammunitions and also any oppositions that have been made in Cameroon. We have a control of weaponry that is done regularly, and stockpiles are managed according to very specific procedures. If there's any violation, well, then this goes before the court and the ruling is made public. All of these actions require good coordination that is actually improving on a day-by-day basis. As regards a post-delivery cooperation, well, we believe that this is an essential issue, really. It is something that should really be clearly discussed and defined during the meetings that we have relating to the ATT. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameroon, for your intervention. Dumisani, do we have anyone else from the conference room?
The next request for the floor are the following. The first one is Mexico, followed by France, Georgia, Argentina. So we can start with Mexico, followed by France.
Sí, buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon. My delegation would like to acknowledge the work carried out by the facilitator, Stella Petrovic from Serbia, in carrying out the work of this working group. We interpret Article 11 in a wide manner, and we hope that the debate on diversion is fruitful. We have a centralized control system to prevent the risk of diversion. The Secretariat of National Security is in charge of this system. The links between illicit markets is key to avoid diversion, given that this complex phenomenon is a serious problem for Mexico and for Latin America and the Caribbean. Given the current situation of armed conflicts in the world, we must take up a debate on the different strategies and measures to avoid future risks of diversion. We have partnered with the EU in the program to foster effective implementation of the ATT, P2P as it's called, and this has allowed us to train some of our officials and to exchange experiences and best practices in the field of diversion. As regards the agenda of today, we need importers and exporting states to cooperate to avoid the risk of diversion. We need to pay more attention to the role of importing states to avoid the risk of diversion. In our case, we have given priority to the National Registry of weapons which enter illicitly in our territory. And we also carry out a sound management of our stockpiles. Post-delivery cooperation is also fundamental. Together with Germany, we carried out a project last year which has taught us a lot. I think that those conclusions can help in developing the document that Germany will prepare for the meeting of CSP8 in August. And lastly, we'd like to echo the comments of Switzerland in the important role of the private sector in preventing risks of diversion. And we think that it's a matter which must be emphasized in the sessions held here at the ATT. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your intervention. Now, France will have the floor, please.
Je vous remercie, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Facilitator, and I would like to thank you for all of the efforts that you are undertaking in the context of the work of this working group. France implements various measures ensuring a strict control of the arms that are imported and preventing the diversion of said arms. My delegation would like to describe certain of these measures in the context of sharing best practices and to contribute to the discussions of this group. Madam Moderator, Facilitator, first of all, it seems important to us that imports should be submitted to a rigorous control. In France, the import of weapons is prohibited. To import war equipment in France, it is necessary to ask for the request of an import license of war equipment, and this is granted by the ministry responsible for customs. Following an opinion given by the Minister of Defense, the Ministry of the Interior, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who all have to give their opinion. As regards the import authorizations, they relate to essentially maintaining public security, and also they take into account the sanctions that are imposed by the European Union. These measures help combat illicit trafficking and diversion. The control of these operations should come on top of a control of importers. In France, a company that wants to import war material has to have a special authorization for intermediation and manufacturing, and these authorizations are granted for a maximum period of 5 years and are renewable. The exercise of this activity is submitted to several conditions and is undertaken under state supervision. Secondly, it seems important to us to encourage a full cooperation between importing and exporting states. In France, the importers can request the delivery of an international certificate of import in order to enable their foreign providers to obtain the authorization to export those goods. They can also request a post-delivery verification or control certificate justifying the situation upon delivery. These certificates are delivered by the ministry that is responsible for customs. France can also fill in the forms for final use certificates that are actually transmitted to it by an exporting country according to the modalities that are in force in that state. There again, the objective is to ensure that the import operation takes place in a rigorous and transparent framework. Finally, the role of customs authorities is essential. What do I mean by that? Well, they control flows and they intercept, wherever necessary, illicit goods that are imported into the country. This is the case of French customs that exercise this activity upon the entry onto French territory of illicitly imported war equipment. Thank you.
Thank you, Franz, for sharing your experience and for your intervention. Now I'm giving the floor to Georgia, followed by delegation of Argentina. Please.
I want to thank Madam Facilitator for giving me the floor. In Georgia, the process of assessing the risk of diversion is based on the national control system and includes the following components: examining parties which are involved in the export, requiring additional authentic documentations, certificates, and assurances. The appropriate measures always are pursuant to Georgia's national law in accordance with the international law. Georgia seeks to prevent the diversion of the transfer of conventional arms covered under Article 2.1. Also cooperates and exchanges information pursuant to our national law. In a case of detecting a diversion of transferred conventional arms covered under Article 2.1, Georgia takes appropriate measures pursuant to its national law in accordance with international law. To address such diversion, taking follow-up measures through investigation and law enforcement, Georgia is obliged to share information to prevent the diversion in an effective manner. The process may include information on illicit activities, including corruption, international trafficking routes, data about illicit brokers, sources of illicit supply, methods of concealment, common points of dispatch, or destinations used by organized groups engaged in diversion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your intervention. Now I'm giving the floor to delegation of Argentina. Please.
Thank you very much, Madam Facilitator. Since this is the first time we take the floor in this sub-working group, we'd like to acknowledge your efforts and work. We will be speaking about 3 items. The current document on diversion, Argentina's post-delivery system, post-delivery control system. As parties may be familiar with, in 2020, Argentina, who was then chair of the 6th CSP, submitted a working document titled Transparency and Exchange of Information, its role in preventing diversion. In said document, which was adopted by consensus in 2021, We emphasize the need to implement Article 11, according to which importing states, exporting states, and transit and transshipment states shall exchange information to mitigate the risk of diversion of transfer of weapons. We also encourage to take specific measures when diversion is identified to warn the importing or transit or transshipment state and the need to apply the applicable norms and standards. Those same warnings can be used to warn on methods of concealment, common points of delivery, information on organized groups that carry out diversion. Exchange of information is key at all moments, from manufacturing to the delivery of weapons and commercialization of these weapons. Some of the measures to mitigate the risk of diversion may be related to some of the consultations carried out by states, that is, to the consultations between importing, exporting, transit, and transshipment states, in the sense that they need to verify documents, end-user certificates, or verify the details of the parties involved when sending and receiving the material. For all of the above, we'd like to recall some of the recommendations put forward in the document which Argentina submitted and which was adopted in the 7th CSP. I'd like to state some examples now. The activities of the Forum for exchange of information on cases of diversion, which allows states to construct or to conceive solutions and compile best practices, or to use all resources to exchange information, such as the platform in the restricted area of the ATT website, so that information can be exchanged quickly and transparently, or to update and communicate the details of the national focal points in case information needs to be shared with a counterpart, or to carry out consultations in order to verify the authenticity of the certificates of importing, exporting, transit, and transshipment states, to carry out consultations and exchange information to verify the legitimacy of the parties involved and the end users, and to carry out verifications of imports and exports, and to exchange information to facilitate early identification of diversions in international transactions. I'd like to move on now to the second item we wanted to speak about: the risk of diversion at an international level and post-delivery control. Argentina has in place a mechanism in which the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is party, as well as two other agencies. In relation with fire weapons, the ANMAC, our national agency, is in charge of issuing a certificate before these weapons can be imported, and a process of verification that this material has been sent to the importing state is also necessary. The Ministry for Foreign Affairs also has a system of pre- and post-delivery control, which is carried out by our military representatives in abroad. And finally, concerning civil society and the private sector, we'd like to reaffirm what other states have already mentioned in the important role they carry out when warning states of possible cases of diversion. We appreciate the work carried out by the civil society during these meetings, and we encourage them to share valuable information with the states, which is extremely helpful in mitigating the risks of diversion. The role of the industry is also fundamental, given that they have very valuable information. We think that the secretaries of the ATT should seek means to encourage their participation in these meetings. We remain at your disposal to collaborate with all parties in the follow-up of the recommendations of the document adopted at the 7th CSP. And we'd like to thank all delegations that contributed during the informal consultations to that document, which were carried out in 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a very detailed intervention regarding all three sessions for today's discussion, and especially for your review of the paper from the 2021 made by Argentina regarding the delivery, post-delivery cooperation, which is essential in this part of transfer chain. Dumisani, can you help me? Do we have anyone less that would like to take the floor?
Thank you, moderator. The next list of speakers are Germany, followed by the EU, Republic of Korea, Cote d'Ivoire, and Peru. So we'll start with Germany, followed by the EU.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Facilitator, for giving Germany the floor. And I'd like personally thank you for your efforts you made to provide us with a lot of very useful information and to organize this meeting today as well. I'd like to also run through the 3 points you highlighted us for today. But first of all, of course, I'd like to start with yesterday evening, with our site event. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank not only all the participants. We were very happy to see so much participants in this event, but I'd like to also thank my colleagues from Switzerland, Canada, Unity, CIPRI, and also our industrial vertreter from Dynamit Nobel for their support for their presentations as well. And I think that underlines the goal, what is described by the title post-delivery cooperation. We're really talking about a cooperation effort of the exporting state, the importing state, all parties who are involved in the supply chain, and of course also civil society and the industry. We see a lot of efforts also by the industry support our work with tools on the one hand side, but also we have to keep in touch, of course, that our measures we try to implement or we had implemented so far, that they are appropriate. Of course, on the one hand side, it's very clear that we have to and we will like to verify exports, and also that we carry out controls in our country, in Germany as well. But on the other side, of course, we see the interest of a legal trade on the other side. So we have to find the balance. That's always a little bit difficult, of course. And I think that demonstrates also the efforts we made in Germany concerning post-shipment, how we call it post-shipment controls, that we try to have a low impact with regard to legal amendments and also with low changes for the license application process for exports, so that there's not that much burden, bureaucratic burden for the exporting industry and also for the consignees and end users in the importing state. So we try to make it as smooth as possible, but of course that's the view of the regulator side, and so therefore we are very happy, and it's very useful for us, of course, also to have the dialogue with the industry but also with all other parties as well. And it was also raised today in some comments by the states and also by you, Madam Facilitator. It's a question of resources when we're talking about the implementation of additional controls. That's, of course, one of the questions which will be raised up all the time first. And I think that's also something we should keep in mind when we're talking about measures in our country and also when we're talking about post-delivery cooperation between exporting and importing state. And maybe some countries who are thinking about developing a system of post-shipment controls, they also will raise up, oh, we need a lot of resources, we need a lot of personnel, the traveling costs are amazing maybe, and also there's the bureaucratic burden for the industry as well. And that's maybe an idea which we try to promote also during our side event. And also, I'm very thankful for the comments by my Swiss colleagues today. They said in 10 years they made 54 controls, and that's of course an interesting and high figure. And but maybe we should also ask Switzerland and how much personnel they have for carrying out these 54 controls and what are the costs. In Germany, as I said, we implemented post-shipment verifications in 2015 on the political level, and our first post-shipment control was done in 2017. So it took 2 years from the political decision up to some legal changes to build up a control team. And also in Germany, we try to run this job with 2 colleagues. And that is maybe also a signal when we're talking about personal and also financial resources, just as an example for that. Coming back to the other points which we like to highlight is of course that post-delivery controls starts always on in the exporting state, or also for us in Germany when we are an importing state. Of course, it's our homework first to do, and therefore I'd like to inform you about some measures we have implemented during the last 20 years, let's say it in that words. And the question is, of course, are we always able to follow an import all the time? That's of course impossible. And also other delegations highlighted the role of the customs administrations. And of course, it's also the same situation in Germany. Customs is the first officer on the front line who is able to verify an arms import to Germany. And of course, they run their checks. But, and that brings me back to the topic or to the term of cooperation. It's a very clear signal on Germany that these frontline customs officers are not standing alone. They get support from the German licensing authority, from BAFA, which is normally responsible for exports, but because we have also a technical division with a lot of colleagues who have technical background knowledge, who are engineers, so that they can support also our frontline customs officers when it comes to questions concerning imports as well. And that's, I think, very important when we're talking about cooperation. Again, different authorities are involved, and you need clear communication channels, very, very clear way how to deliver information to the frontline officers. And also we have to keep in mind that for the customs officers who are working frontline, that's not their only duty to carry out controls of arms imports or arms exports. Of course, that would be maybe our dream, that's their only task, but they have a lot of different tasks to do, and therefore they need tailor-made, very concrete information from authorities who are standing behind customs, like the licensing authority, that they are able to carry out the controls on spot. And a further instrument which we implemented in Germany is our so-called foreign trade audits. So this is more a paper check on the promises of the German exporter, also on the German importers, And it's only also done by customs in Germany, but in cooperation with the licensing authority. So that gives us also a possibility to carry out controls on the ground and to see documents on the one hand side, and when we're talking about import cases, also to see the weapons itself in a physical way. So that's also an instrument maybe we should think about it, or we should discuss further on. So these are just some ideas which we implemented in Germany as well, parallel, of course, to our activities when it comes to post-delivery cooperation, post-delivery checks abroad. So therefore, also we have to find the balance, and we are very clear, it's our clear understanding in Germany that, of course, first the checks has to be done in our country, during an application process, during the custom clearance, when it comes to imports, and so on. So that's the first step. And then, of course, it's very useful, and I think that's one of the fantastic ideas of the Arms Trade Treaty. Then we have to, when we like to launch an international cooperation to verify all aspects of such a move, of such a transfer of arms. And I think that's maybe, let's say, a two-step approach, doing first our homework inland and then starting international cooperation. With that, Madam Facilitator, I'd like to stop here for a while, but I'd like to thank once again all the delegations so far for their commitments and for their statements today. And of course, we will present a further document which was highlighted also today and by my Swiss colleagues and also yesterday by Ambassador Goebel to the CSP8. And once again, whenever a delegation likes to give us input, that's always very welcome, because our idea, of course, is that we will not only give some information how to develop a system of post-delivery controls or post-shipment controls, but we also like to cover, as I said, all aspects of the supply chain, starting from the exporting state up to the importing state with all parties who are involved, and of course also with industry and civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to thank the delegate of Germany for this very detailed information and for sharing your measures you are taking on mitigating diversion risks. It is very important to hear different kind of approaches from different sides, and I think sharing experience, especially on this stage, is very important when we are talking about post-delivery cooperation. Now I'm giving the floor to EU. After EU, I'm giving the floor to Côte d'Ivoire, please.
Thank you, Madam Facilitator, and let me at the outset thank you, Mrs. Petrovic, for your excellent work on the implementation of this important article of the treaty that deals with diversion. I would like, on behalf of the EU, just to highlight two messages, general messages. The first one is that indeed, as many already have stated, it is not up to exporting states alone to ensure that we prevent the diversion of military equipment and technology. So indeed, the collaboration between exporting and importing states and authorities, relevant authorities, is key to prevent diversion from happening. This can be done in various ways, including through the tool of post-shipment controls that has been discussed by many already today. Secondly, we are very much forward to the launch of a new additional tool, which for the first time in history will come together in August of this year during the Conference of State Parties, the 8th Conference of State Parties. of the ATT, which is the Diversion Information Exchange Forum. And we have high hopes that that particular tool can contribute tremendously to the prevention of diversion. We have full confidence in the chair of the Diversion Information Exchange Forum, and we are sure that he will be able to maintain the desired level of confidentiality while at the same time ensuring that the relevant information is being shared amongst key players. Thank you, Madam Facilitator.
Thank you for your intervention. Now I'm giving the floor to Côte d'Ivoire, please.
Merci. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator or Facilitator. Allow me, following on previous speakers, of sharing my experience in Côte d'Ivoire concerning best practices for attenuation of the risk of diversion. Côte d'Ivoire is not a producer of weapons and thus not an exporting country, but is just a consumer or importer. But all that we do fits into the ECOWAS Convention on small caliber and lightweight weapons, which are mostly the ones used in my country. This convention aims at banning import. That is the basic principle. But entitles states to ensure their defense, security, and peacekeeping on their soil. So it's the principle of exemption that is adopted. By this, I mean ECOWAS and Côte d'Ivoire feels that it is legitimate to import weapons to ensure its defense and security. But it is necessary to ask other states of ECOWAS to authorize this import, specifying the type of weapons, their number and caliber, and awaiting the acceptance by other states for this import to be authorized. Once this is obtained, the weapons that are to be imported need to be marked duly, conventional marking and security marking, which makes it possible to have systematic follow-up of the weapon from the producer to the final user, as these weapons will be registered at each level. This registration is dual through registers, but also electronically. And a national data bank has been created, which is then transferred to the ECOWAS data bank. And to this, there is safer and more secure management through the reconditioning of stockpiles and also the building of new stockpiles which are in line with new international standards. And stock managers are always trained at a higher level. This adds to the reduction of the risk of diversion. It is recommended and is practiced that there be a destruction of obsolete weapons or weapons that have not been marked or that have been seized for destruction to avoid illegal rerouting of these weapons. Weapons are seized and legal procedures are also concerned by this destruction. Furthermore, Côte d'Ivoire has ports for landlocked countries, and a special control regime is applied for these weapons to reach the final users, which are outside Côte d'Ivoire, and to avoid any diversion. All of these measures are taken within my country, small caliber and light weapons, but this also applies to other weapons. And all our international commitments of the ATT and ECOWAS have all been formalized within my country. And this is what I wanted to say in terms of experience sharing. I would like to thank you for having listened to me, and to say that we can but wish that this practice be continued. Thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. Now I'm giving the floor to delegation of the Republic of Korea, please.
Thank you, Madam Facilitator, for giving me the floor. I would like to briefly share the policy and practice of the Republic of Korea to prevent the diversion. And an importer of strategic items, including weapons, is required by the exporting country to submit a certificate of import purpose indicating the end use of the strategic item. The certificate of import purpose is issued by the relevant licensing authority in accordance with the relevant domestic laws and regulations, such as Foreign Trade Act and the Public Notice of Exportation and Importation of Strategic Items. The issuing authority may check whether the imported item for which the certificate of import purpose was issued has been transferred or re-exported to another country without permission when necessary. In addition, if the exporter requests to verify whether the imported strategic item has arrived at its initially scheduled destination, the Customs Office issues a customs clearance certificate. Similarly, when a strategic item is exported from the Republic of Korea, the licensing authority requests import purpose and customs clearance certificates issued by the government of the importing country if it is deemed necessary to prevent diversion. In the Republic of Korea, domestic laws governing the management of weapons stockpiles are established to prevent the diversion of weapons from stockpiles. A structured system for marking, record keeping, and tracing weapons is established in accordance with the laws and regulations, and an electronic system manages the data. The responsibilities of the management agencies and personnel, evaluation and disposal procedures for unused equipment are also specified in the relevant laws and regulations. Thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. I would like to ask Dumisani, do we have anyone else from the conference room that would like to take the floor?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The next list of speakers is Peru, the UK, and China. We'll start with Peru, followed by the UK.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias a la Secretaría.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the sub-working group, and especially the facilitator for all the work that you have carried out. An excellent work, and I'm at your disposal to help you if you need our help. My country considers it very important to implement Article 11 of the ATT to prevent diversion of firearms and munitions, because often they fall in wrong hands as terrorists, drug traffickers, gangs, and who carried out criminal offenses against the security of our citizens or even the security of the state. In our countries, we have added controls, increased controls recently, because the illicit trade of weapons has been a very serious threat in our country and growing in the last few years. We do not manufacture, do not export weapons, but we have strict controls both on the importation of weapons and on the use of weapons by the population. Law enforcement personnel is in charge of that, and as well in cooperation with customs officials. Cooperation between states is also very important, especially border states, the states we have a border with, because they could be transit states. But we consider the cooperation could help us fight illicit trade of weapons. One country alone cannot do much. The importing and exporting state must cooperate as well as transit states. The important thing is to avoid diversion of weapons. Also, we encourage destruction of obsolete weapons and components. We consider that if re-exportation is not duly controlled, can give rise to illicit trade and diversion. Again, thank you very much for all the work that you have done, and thank you for giving me the floor.
I would like to thank the delegate from Peru. Now I'm giving the floor to delegation of United Kingdom. Please.
Thank you, Madam Facilitator, for your excellent work on this issue. In the interest of time, this is just a brief intervention which relates to session 3, to say that the UK appreciates the continued focus on the issue of diversion. We believe that this is an important area for coordination. We consider the risk of diversion very carefully in our export licensing process, assessing information from a wide variety of sources. We see the Diversion Information Exchange Forum as having the potential to play an important role here, and we look forward to its first meeting in August during CSP8. Moreover, the UK welcomes the role that the private sector and civil society already plays in preventing diversion. As an example, the UK uses civil society's research on illicit supply chains to inform our robust assessments about the risk of diversion. We believe that the private sector and civil society have an important role in informing guidance and ideas for the prevention of diversion. I thank you.
Thank you for your intervention and your review of importance of private sector and civil society in order to prevent diversion in this stage.
I would like to thank the facilitator and the Secretariat for your preparatory work. China also welcomes all parties' exchange of ideas and practices on prevention of diversion. Here, on behalf of China, I would like to introduce some of our policies and practices. China has always taken active measures to prevent diversion of arms. China has implemented a monopoly mechanism on arms. Basically, only countries authorized by the government can conduct exporting of arms. Also, negotiating, contracting, and shipment all require government authorization. China only conducts conventional arms trade with sovereign states. We never sell arms to non-state actors. China specified that recipient government must promise to produce certificate on the end use and end user. They also need to promise that they will not transfer to any third party arms imported from China without the authorization of the Chinese government. We believe these will help alleviate the risk of diversion of arms. With regard to the three items, China believes that diversion is addressed by control system and there are many practices. Even though there is strict examination from the export countries, there is still risk of diversion. In this regard, export countries should fulfill their obligation to take effective measures to prevent illicit diversion, and all countries should strengthen exchange of ideas, informations, and cooperation in enforcement so as to deal with this issue. Finally, I would like to say China stands ready to strengthen cooperation with all parties in exchange of ideas and to contribute to the effort of addressing the issue of diversion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your intervention. And now I would like to ask Dumisani for help regarding the next speaker, if we do have anyone who would like to make intervention.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We now have the last speaker on my list. That is Control Arms, but they'll be making the intervention online, as I'm made to understand. But other than that, I don't have any other request in the room as well as online. So this is the last speaker that I have. So Control Arms on the list, on the online, please.
Hello? Thank
Hello.
you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, facilitator. I am requesting for the screen. Thank you, ma'am, facilitator. The private sector can play a significant role in preventing the diversion of weapons. A prerequisite for this is that governments take steps to ensure that private sector actors that are involved in the international arms trade are aware of the laws and regulations that this must adhere to. Arms manufacturing industry, freight forwarders, financial institutions, and insurance companies should gather information on suspicious actors and activities of concern and share this with governments, authorities, and among industry associations. For their part, civil society organizations have taken on an array of roles and in preventing diversion, including through building the capacity of the state to implement international and regional arms control agreements, monitoring and reporting on the diversion of weapons, carrying out extensive research on all of aspects of diversion, proposing measures to prevent diversion, and raising the alarm when weapons are actually being diverted. For example, in 2021, the Italian Peace and Disarmament Network for the Permanent Observatory on Light Weapons and Security and Defense Policies and the association Weapon Watch investigate, reported, and sought the clarity from the government of Italy on the diversion of munitions to Senegal. Control arms members in Latin America have reported on troubled trends in armed violence. For example, in 2022, Instituto Sou da Paz in Brazil examined and report on the connection between legal and illegal arms markets and its impact on diversion in Sao Paulo. Civil society continues to explore how to improve the research and monitoring on the international arms trade in diversion of weapons. In moving forward, Control Arms urge states to draw on a broader range of inputs, including those which are directly critical of states. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your intervention. Dumisani, do we have anyone else who would like to take the floor, or?
Well, I confirm, Madam Chair, that there is no further request for the floor, both in the room as well as on the chat function. So we have exhausted the list of speakers.
Okay. I think that we have around 30 minutes more, but if there is no one who would like to take the floor at the moment, I suggest to conclude the discussion.
Madam Moderator, I just want to make some few announcements before you close the session, if you allow me.
Yes, please.
I have a few announcements to make at this hour. It's just to announce that we have site events that will be taking place after this session. We've got two of them. The first one is a site event running under this title, How to Prevent Diversion of Illicit Small Arms and Light Weapons in Conflict and Post-Conflict Scenarios, exploring lessons learned and recommendations from the Balkans, Central Africa, and Central America. So this site event is organized by the Permanent Mission of Sweden, jointly with IM Swedish Development Partner, as well as IANSA. I must therefore stress that this site event is taking place in a hybrid format, basically meaning you will be able to go to room B in this building and be able to participate in this site event, and others will be able to participate in the same event online. So it's a hybrid site event taking place in room B from 4:15, 4:15. The second site event is going under the title Preventing and Mitigating the Risk of Arms Diversion in Africa. It is organized by the European External Action Service, as well as Safer World. It takes place virtually. It's not hybrid, it's just virtual, it's online. And it takes place from 4:15. The links for these site events are available on the ATT website. So if you require the relevant links, so you can use the ATT website. Well, the second announcement then will be about the uploading of statements. Those participants and delegates who would want their statements that they have made here to be published on the ATT website can forward those statements to the ATT Secretariat, and will publish them on the ATT website accordingly. And thirdly, again, is a plea to facilitate interpretation here. We request delegates, those who will be making longer interventions, to submit their statements in advance of the delivery of those statements, so that the interpreters can have them ahead of time, and then they can prepare accordingly. And the next one is about the video recordings. I stated yesterday that there will be video recordings of all the sessions. And I confirm now that the video recordings of the session of yesterday is available on the ATT website. And the recordings of today will be available tomorrow. And that is the order that they would take. And finally, on a lost and found basis, there is a charger that has been found in this room yesterday. So that charger is currently placed at the reception of this facility by the door. So if you have lost a charger yesterday, so you can approach the front desk and you'll be able to get your charger. But of course, I'm advised that there will be some degree of verification that will have to take place. And I think seeing that verification is a buzzword, and I think there will be some verification that will be conducted. Madam Facilitator, those are all the announcements I wanted to make, and I hand over to you then to conclude the session.
Then, as we do not have anyone else who would like to make intervention, as a facilitator, I would like to thank to all delegates who participate on today's meeting. I would like especially to thank for all interventions and comments, as well as for sharing concrete examples from your expertise. We noted all the comments and for consideration for the future work of this working group. I have to say that all comments and all interventions were very valuable, and we very appreciate your engagement in this sense. At the end, I would like to thank to Mr. Dumisani and the whole ATT team for support of this during this session, especially that I'm facilitating remotely, and I really appreciate your support. I hope that we reach the goal of this session, and I'm sending you the greetings from Belgrade until our next meeting, until CSP8 in August. Thank you very much.
This session is adjourned then. Thank you so much.